For the past few days, a shadowy figure had been lurking around the front gates of the wealthy landlord Rogers' mansion just outside of Los Angeles. Ever since the French occupied the city's rice storehouses and started rationing the rice, the only way to get grains was through the vouchers the colonial Indochina government issued. Many people in the city were dying, corpses piled up on street corners, the living staggered around like hollow husks, ghosts drifting through the darkness. Times were hard and food was scarce. Last year, those with money could still hold their heads high and enjoy comfort amidst the chaos. But this year, no amount of money could buy rice. Gold and money moldered uselessly indoors while its owners wasted away. The wealthy and the landlords were reduced to begging refugees, far from their homes in search of sustenance, no different than the penniless peasants caked in mud with sunken eyes. Roger's family had survived thus far thanks to his connections with a French district chief. Roger had a daughter, Sarah, famed for her beauty. Her charms earned them gifts and relations with the French and Japanese officials who dispensed rice and cotton. Meanwhile, the common people withered and starved, gnawing on roots and tree bark, mouths agape as they waited for death. And yet there were still those with more food than they could eat, feeding the excess to their cattle and distilling old rice into liquor, burning rice as fuel for their steam engines. Roger's prosperity amidst such desperation contrasted obscenely with the misery around them. Worse, he was viciously heartless. When beggars lingered by his gates, hands stretched out pleading for a handful of spilled grains, he'd send his men to beat them to death for disturbing his afternoon nap. Roger's head servant at the time was Johnny, a loyal brute who led the gang of thugs. At the first sight of a beggar, they would chase them away with beatings. One day, Johnny saw a filthy, haggard woman collapsed in front of Roger's house. He headed outside, ready to yell and drive her off. But as he approached, Johnny realized this woman was his childhood friend from Oak Village. Overcome with pity, he decided to sneak her inside for a meal. But Roger's words echoed in his head. In times like these, even old friends must be killed, lest they eat your flesh and drink your blood. Compassion invites calamity. Roger had plucked Johnny from the jaws of death and given him purpose. To Johnny, Roger's words were law. Going against them was like smashing his own legs and laying his guts out for all to see. With that, Johnny hardened his heart and left the woman where she lay, too weak to stand. Her dim eyes seemed to plead for one final wish, something she needed before death took her. Johnny hurried inside and grabbed a sturdy wooden club. He marched up to the woman and said firmly, "I cannot help you, my old friend, but I can grant you one last mercy, a quick, painless death." The woman's eyes flooded with tears as her shaky hand moved across her belly, as if signaling something. But Johnny steeled himself and smashed the club down onto her head, splitting her skull open in a splatter of brains. Her hand slid from her belly down her gaunt, skeletal body, eyes wide with tears and blood, mouth agape. The woman, his childhood friend, lay dead, truly dead. Such was the fate of the destitute in these times, forced to gnaw bark and drain putrid water to stave off hunger, even consuming human flesh. The horrors of this age plunged humanity into a waking hell. Weak and trembling bodies, racked by starvation's torment, confronted the mind with endless anguish. Johnny left his friend's corpse in the street for flies and dogs without a proper burial, tossed aside like trash. Bodies lined the roads these days. No one cared for one more. In times like these, with food and survival uncertain, who worried for others? Perhaps it was understandable given the desperation of the times, but for old friends, Johnny's actions were needlessly cruel. If he could not offer aid, the least he could do was bury her, not leave her to be ravaged by vermin. Some mercy that was, no better than a beast's barbarity. Months slipped away. A small banyan sapling suddenly sprouted up outside Roger's mansion. At first it was just a tiny shoot with 2 leaves, then it grew as tall as a child before surpassing the height of the fence. Roger was puzzled by the appearance of this banyan at his gate, but pleased at the prospect of cool shade for his afternoon naps, shielding him from the harsh summer sun. He decided to just let the tree grow. Over the next few months, the banyan grew rapidly as if by magic. Strangely, ever since the tree appeared, hordes of starving peasants gathered and died at Roger's gate, their bodies clustered around its trunk. The stench of rotting corpses grew rank, wafting for miles. Roger ordered his men to clear the bodies multiple times and stand guard, but to no avail. Oddly, the more corpses piled up, the faster the tree grew. Within a year, it was as thick as a longan tree. Roger noticed the correlation. It didn't take a genius to see the connection between the deaths and the banyan. Given Roger's devotion to spirits and rituals, he suspected mystical forces were at play. Superstition ran deep in these times, beyond the reach of the French mission civilisatrice. As a long-standing gentry family conducting elaborate ceremonies, Roger firmly believed in the supernatural. He ordered his men to cut down the banyan by any means, but none could chop it down. The strong broke their arms, axes shattered, even oxen collapsed, foaming at the mouth when tied to pull it over. Roger had nightmares of a figure perched in the banyan leering at him, baring ghostly teeth. Rustling sounds came from behind the leaves, though no one was there when he sent men to investigate. Most disturbingly, when they axed the trunk, instead of sap, vivid red liquid like blood oozed out. The superstitious claimed it proved the tree was haunted by accumulating ghosts. The rational guessed it was a rare blood banyan. Either way, the tree resisted all efforts to remove it, leaving Roger restless and determined to solve this gracefully. Among Sarah's admirers from the capital was Patrick, a university student whose father served the French. Patrick was visiting Roger for a few days and happened to arrive on the Ghost Festival, the July full moon when offerings were made to spirits. Roger greeted him warmly, asking, "As a modern student, I suppose you don't care for old customs like these offerings?" Patrick smiled wryly. "While modernized, I'm well versed in Vietnamese traditions. These ceremonies are mere superstitions that let the wealthy show off, but it's a foolish pastime for the powerful, attracting officials' attention." Roger was not offended. Instead, he praised Patrick's deep thinking. After a pause, he asked, "Surely you must believe ghosts exist to haunt the living when given the chance?" Patrick scoffed. "Ghosts? Modern scientific thinking rejects such superstitious notions as peasant ignorance. Don't debase yourself by believing such baseless things. It's unbecoming of an enlightened man." The more they talked, the more Roger saw Patrick's arrogance and hubris. Yet he stayed cheerful, asking, "Since you don't believe in ghosts, would you dare wager with me to prove they exist?" Patrick nodded. "I would not hesitate. In fact, I'm certain I would win, for ghosts are not real. But the stakes must be high for it to be worthwhile." Roger's eyes glittered as he asked what Patrick meant by high. Patrick declared, "You know what I want, your daughter's hand in marriage. If you agree to those terms, the bet will be most meaningful." Roger narrowed his eyes. Sarah was the ultimate prize sought by all the capital's playboys. Patrick's pursuit of her was just a game to humiliate rivals by winning her as a bride. Since Patrick did not believe in spirits, marrying the old man's daughter for a frivolous reason seemed easy profit. If Roger foolishly handed her over, why bother with tricks? Now that Roger had proposed the bet himself, Patrick would never let this chance slip away. He would seize the old man's bait and claim Sarah, letting those fops from the capital boil with jealousy at his skill. With just one trip, he ate up the many suitors who had fruitlessly squandered gifts and efforts for years, proving his superiority. Roger was not surprised but delighted at Patrick's terms. That cursed blood banyan had plagued him for so long. If he could resolve it easily this way, he'd do anything necessary. He had tried everything to no avail before. Perhaps an educated man would have a different, more effective approach. Modern thinking from the upper class was supposedly superior. Naturally, their solutions would differ. Outwardly, Roger pretended to deliberate, but he was eager to sign and be done with it. Still, he slowed things down to make Patrick think he was the lucky one, not Roger. Having dealt with the tree fruitlessly, Roger knew its difficulty best. The easier his opponent conceded, the more suspicious it seemed. Roger played his role shrewdly, aiming to ensnare this arrogant pup in his cunning trap. And with a provincial council seat, Roger could move up and leave this place, free of the wretched tree's reach. He could sell off this whole estate and live comfortably as councilman. So Roger stalled before finally saying the terms were fine, but Patrick still didn't know what he wanted to bet on. Patrick arrogantly replied the details were unimportant. The key was mutually agreeable terms. As for disproving ghosts, that was Roger's problem. One way or another, Patrick would win, making Roger his reluctant father-in-law. Roger feigned anger and described the Banyan's mysterious appearance and the hordes of peasants swarming to die beneath it. Far from frightened, Patrick laughed. Just as Roger expected, with such arrogance, Patrick would not take it seriously. Patrick neatly transcribed their wager and signed his name. He slid the contract over, pressing Roger to add his signature. Without hesitating a second longer, Roger signed immediately. Patrick reviewed it once more before solemnly placing the contract in a box, saying, "The terms are set. We'll lock the contract in this box until the outcome is clear. For now, I'll keep it here. It will be safe." After locking the contract box, Patrick laughed and taunted Roger. "I can't believe you'd bet your daughter over something so silly. Does craving that council seat drive you mad? Even if it cost $1,000, would you really stake your daughter on such nonsense?" Now Roger burst into hearty laughter, retorting, "You'll soon see you just tossed money out the window, my friend. Just wait. You'll realize how difficult this truly is." Roger's sudden shift troubled Patrick. Though he regretted it now, the contract was signed. Recalling Roger's behavior, it seemed Patrick had entered the snare, not the other way around. Patrick proposed the bet and terms. He had entrapped himself, not Roger. The next day, Patrick was given a room west of the Banyan for the night. His only regular contacts were Sarah and Yanni. Now and then Johnny ran in and out, noisy and flustered. Once when he entered the gate, Patrick noticed his clothes were soaked red with chunks of white. Though Patrick did not realize it was the blood and brains of the beggars, Johnny beaten to death. Later, Patrick learned that Johnny and the servants would attack and kill any beggars, disturbing the house per Roger's orders. The red was their blood, the white their brains plastered over Johnny's clothes. Patrick sat disturbed envisioning the violent scene before a polite voice called from outside, "Sir Patrick, I pay you respects." Johnny's voice jarred Patrick from his thoughts. Still dazed, he saw Johnny at the door and prepared to respond, but Johnny interjected. "Sir, the landlord bid me serve you directly. Ask anything of me. I will provide for your needs." Patrick looked Johnny up and down before nodding. "Fine. No hurry with the tree business. I'm still here a while. The landlord sent you to nudge me about our wager, I gather." After pacing in thought, Patrick peered at Johnny and asked, "I heard the Banyan he wants cut has many strange properties, is that right?" Johnny pondered, unsure what strangeness he meant, simply answering, "I know not what strangeness, sir, but besides luring beggars to their deaths, the tree also drinks blood." Uttering this, Johnny abruptly shuddered in terror, as if recalling something horrific. Regaining composure, Johnny looked Patrick in the eye and said gravely, "Mean no disrespect, but another servant, also named Patrick, was sent to cull beggars one night on the landlord's command. He never returned. At dawn I found his withered corpse at the Banyan's base. And also..." Johnny stammered again. Patrick impatiently pressed him to continue. Mopping his brow, Johnny explained, On the tree was a fruit as large as a man's head, with a face just like Servant Patrick's. Its gaping mouth matched the corpses below. Afterward, the landlord had us climb up to cut it down for burial. Initially unnerved, Patrick laughed it off, yelling, "The landlord thinks me a fool. He fabricated this tale to win our bet, even naming the servant after me, wishing I'd share his fate. Despicable threat." Johnny shrank back, falling silent until Patrick declared, "If he is so impatient, then I'll chop down this tree at midnight and see if he dares spew more nonsense. Ghosts fear nighttime most, don't they? I'll show them by felling it under darkness." Patrick shooed Johnny away, forbidding disturbance until midnight when he would permit an audience. When Johnny related this to Roger, the landlord chuckled happily. "If Patrick is so rash, your father will be councilman in no time. Watch him carefully for me. If he can't chop it down, dissuade him to avoid misfortune. We don't want trouble with officials if something befalls him." Confused, Johnny asked, "Wouldn't it please Roger for Patrick to lose?" Roger explained Patrick had to concede completely. Only then could he safely become councilman and resolve the cursed tree without angering officials. Finally comprehending, Johnny quickly added his agreement. Roger had thought it through thoroughly